Oh, dieser blöde Verkehr geht mir auf den Nerven. Wieso fährst du so langsam, spinnst du? Das geht auf keine Kuhhaut. Warte mal, was habe ich gesagt? Das geht auf keine Kuhhaut. Das ist eine komische Redewendung. Was bedeutet das? Lass uns darüber reden. Das hier ist Lernen und Fahren. So I want to take a break from the usual syntax and grammar lessons we've been doing lately and take a look at something fun. Let's take a look at a very curious expression in the German language that I came across recently. Das geht auf keine Kuhhaut. What it means is something like, that's incredible, or that's unbelievable, or that's impossible. I can't believe this. But what it literally means, if you look at the literal translation of that, it means that doesn't go on one cow skin. But how in the world do we get there from that expression? To answer that, let's take a look at a roughly equivalent expression in the English language that you may have heard and never really thought about. The expression is, that's beyond the pale. What does that mean? Well, it means roughly the same thing as das geht auf keine Kuhhaut in German. I can't believe this, that's impossible, that's incredible. But where does that come from? And specifically, how would you spell the word pale there? Is it P-A-I-L, like a noun, like the bucket that goes beyond the bucket? Or is it P-A-L-E, like the adjective, you look really pale today, that goes beyond the pale? Neither of those really seems to fit. In order to make sense of this, we have to go back a few hundred years in English history. The word pale, and it's P-A-L-E by the way, it's a noun. It's not used much in modern English, but it used to refer to a fenced or bounded-in area. The Old English word pale comes from the Old Latin word palus, which means fence. And in fact, fun side note, the English word palisade, which is a type of construction they used to use when they were making forts, palisade comes from the same Latin word palus, meaning fence, and that's where the Old English word pale comes from. Now, Pale, about 600 or 700 years ago, referred to the English Pale in Ireland. The English Pale was the area of Ireland that was under direct English governance. Everything outside of the English Pale in Ireland was considered, by the English anyway, as being a sort of lawless frontier. Later, the English word Pale became more generic. It just referred to any kind of a fenced or bounded-in area. Holy cow! That guy's in a hurry. Woo! It just came to refer to any sort of fenced or bounded-in area. So for example, if you owned a farm and you had a fence going around the outside of your farm, everything inside that fence was your pale, and everything outside or beyond the pale was not your property, not your jurisdiction, so to speak. So the expression came about at some point in the last few hundred years, that's beyond the pale, referring to something that's just outrageous, something that's inconceivable. But even though the word pale, P-A-L-E, meaning a fenced or bounded-in area, isn't really used much anymore in modern English, it might still be used in certain legal contexts, but it's rarely used in conversational English anymore. But the expression is still around, even though most people who use the expression probably don't really know where it came from. And I think something similar is happening in German with the expression das geht auf keine Kuhhaut. The expression has stuck around long after the original meaning of it has been more or less forgotten. So where does it come from? Well, first let's look at Kuhhaut. Why are we talking about cow skin? Well, it turns out that in the old days, and I mean the really old days, in Germany, and German-speaking countries, I guess, they didn't use sheets of paper made out of compressed wood pulp like we do today. Instead, they used to take cut and dried sheets of cowhide or cow skin. And if you dry it out enough, it turns out you can write on it, like a piece of paper. Okay, we're halfway there, but why are we talking about stuff not going onto a piece of cow skin? Well, if you look at old German religion or superstition, there was a belief that when you died, your soul would go to some kind of purgatory where your sins would be judged, and whether or not you got into heaven or hell would depend on what kind of a life you had lived. Now, there was a guy, the devil maybe, there was a guy who would write down every sin that you'd ever committed in your entire life on a piece of cowhide. Every bad thing you've ever done in your entire life would be written down on a sheet of cowskin parchment, one by one, line by line. And if they fit onto one sheet of that parchment made out of cowskin, then you were okay. It was kind of expected that everyone's going to sin at least a little bit, right? So if your sins fit neatly onto one sheet of cowskin parchment, you were okay. But if your sins were so numerous that they didn't fit onto one sheet of cowskin parchment, you were in trouble. So the expression came about, das geht keine Kuhhaut. It means it doesn't fit onto one sheet of cowskin parchment. But it's an interesting look at how expressions can stick around long after the original meaning of the words that those expressions are based on has fallen out of popular use. After all, how many people in English-speaking countries still know the original definition of the word pale? And I wonder how many people in German-speaking countries know the true origin of the expression das geht keine Kuhhaut. It's something to think about anyway.